Hello, everyone. First time, first
First
attempt. It
try.
works.
First
Sorry,
try. First
I
try.
we were doing
Uh,
some last minute adjustments, and I had tried 3 times already to switch
yeah.
uh,
So,
the camera to the right one.
uh,
Whoops, that's fine.
so,
Hello and welcome to Design with Italians or Code with Italians design mode. I don't know. We haven't really figured out the official name yet, I guess. So it's fine. So today we're gonna be talking about affordances, and we have with us our friend and co-host Chris. Hi, Chris. Welcome back. I'm
Thanks for having me.
looking forward to this. And we also have Ivan. Ciao, Ivan.
ciao, caro. How you doing? Thank you for being with us, Chris. This is very important for me because I'm committed to learn more about design. So I really want to be here, and I really want you to be here to tell me what are we talking about. What is this stuff? Sebastiano just gives me the graphics. I have an idea. Chris is gonna be with us, and then they give me a topic, and I was like, cool. Once again, I have no idea what we are gonna talk about. So thank you, Chris, for being with us. And bear with my ignorance.
Of course, yeah. I think, yeah, it's design is. I love design. I'm a designer, obviously, but I think one of the things I do like is teaching people about design. And at one point, I didn't know anything about design, so uh, I'm always willing to take people on that journey as well. And it's the same when I learned development. Other developers were teaching me how to be a better developer, even though I'm not one full time anymore. But yeah, cool. I guess we can get started, or
Yeah,
is there
sure.
other
Let's get
intros?
started.
Yes.
Um, so I think, where do we get? So affordances,
A definition probably is a good start.
yeah. There, so I'm gonna send you over a link. It's a Wikipedia article, but it's I'm gonna send it over to chat, and you can put it on
Oh
the.
yeah, sure.
Um,
Ah,
I
that's
can't define affordances like in one sentence, but basically the term was, I think it was coined by a guy named Donald Norman. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with the book
I
The
am.
Design of Everyday Things. Okay, yeah, Sebastiano is. But it was a book written in the late 80s. Every designer, at least from my knowledge, it's kind of like the fundamental book we all pick up when we first begin to learn how to do design, at least for UI design. Um, so when I first started my university curriculum as a designer, it was like our professor was like, read this book. And like once you read this book, it's a really short read, and I'd highly advise anyone actually to read it, especially if you're working in software and with UI and with designers. There's a lot of really basic lessons in the book that it just makes you look at everything that has been designed in your life and that you use in a very different way. Um, but one of the terms that was introduced in the book was this idea of an affordance. And so Don Norman is famously like talks a lot about affordances in terms of door handles.
Okay.
But I think the way I would say affordances, it's some visual, or actually it's not even visual, it's some cue to the user of like how to use something. So the door handle is always used because when you look at doors, right, it's like, what is the goal of the door? It's like, well, you want to open and close the door. So the first thing is like, how do I open the door? And affordances are meant to like cue to the person how to use something without actually telling them explicitly, like with
Okay.
instructions. So with a door, it's like you see a handle and you're like, oh, the handle, like I should be using that thing. But then the question is like, does the door open outward? Do I pull it or do I push it? And so with affordances, like, and we've now that you're going to look at door handles very differently from now on, but
Yeah.
the simple example he says is like when you see doors that have just like a metal plate on them, like a square, you instinctually, as a human, you're like, oh, I will put my hand on that plate and push it.
Yeah.
And that's how I know how to use this door. Versus like if you see door handles, you actually are still confused about, does this pull or push? And this happens all the time now. But it's a very small example that you can extend to everything you've seen with designs. So his book goes through, it actually doesn't go through a lot of software. It goes through a lot of like physical things, like how ovens are designed, how doors are designed. And basically like affordances are a very powerful design tool that helps users kind of give them cues about how to use something without giving them the manual.
Okay.
So this has been extended in a lot of ways. So let's see, actually, I think there's a really good Twitter account. One example, it's this very old, I think it's called the Infinity Loop. It's like has all these old screenshots of Apple stuff. Where is it? It's a funny account. I can't find it though. But I guess maybe we can just go. If you just Google like older pictures of Apple software, so Apple had this design style called skeuomorphic, which part of that was like tying back to affordances, which is like what Apple was doing was they were designing things to look like more mapped to real life. So it had things like texture and like it's like, oh, okay, well, a book, it's like, how do we teach people how to use an address book on a computer? It's like, well, let's make it look like a physical address book. So they're like used to seem like leather, but then they also might think like, oh, I can turn these pages. And so, I mean, it's kind of departed from that, of course, but Apple had done this a lot with their own design style, which was like trying to design the UI to look as in a way that like you knew how to use it without a manual. So like it was very clear what was a button. It was very clear like what was a slider. And interestingly, I think today we've kind of gone away from that. But
Yeah.
the reason why though is I think it's interesting to read this book in the 80s because one of the things it does say is like affordances are great, but affordances are also based off of what people's experiences are. So it's like, you know, UIs that we find intuitive today, they are intuitive because we've learned like these are just the patterns that we use, but at some point they weren't intuitive. Like when people were learning how to use a mouse and keyboard, they were like, 30 years ago, it wasn't clear what double click was or what should be clicked. Can I drag things? Like you didn't have those kinds of things.
It feels like, the fact that things got familiar is way different than they were intuitive to use. Like in a very, okay, I have a gut feeling that this is gonna be like this, right? The door is the perfect example, I guess, because, well, everybody knows what's a door, but then you see a handle, as you say, the moment you see a handle, oh, damn it, is it pull or push? And then most of the time you have the label, right? But then, for instance, in Italy, doors, especially in public places, they need to allow emergency exit kind of flow. So they need to open outward. Is it
outwards?
And then, knowing this, I'm constantly trying to push a door, no matter what, until I find the door that is not following the rule because reasons, and I just smack myself in the door. So
I mean, very often the case is that those rules are relatively recent. So there's a lot of doors that pre-existed, and then you shouldn't count on the rule.
Yeah, but it's fascinating.
And tied to affordances actually is feedback, which I think that might have been the original pitch of this stream. Is affordances go hand in hand with feedback because affordances kind of like no pun intended, like open the door to like what you can do, but you actually need immediate feedback to understand whether your assumption of how to use something was correct. So like the door is a good example. Like the reason why we don't struggle with doors as much is because as soon as you try to pull or push that door, it will either work or not work. But it's in that split second, oh, I'm supposed to pull it. And that kind of plays out in software because you might think like, or actually to flash forward to, today with like apps like Instagram or Snapchat, there's all these gestures that like, for a lot of like older folks, including myself, were very bewildered of like, wait, how do I use this? Like, how do I like add filters? How do I like go to the next story? Like you had to learn all these swipe gestures. But the thing is, the reason why those affordances worked over time and people learned it is because as soon as you start swiping, the screen reacts, like it moves immediately in response to your finger. So that's the other part about affordances is like once you learn that swipe gestures, like things can be swiped, you'll start to like try to tap things or swipe things, and as soon as you see that there's no feedback, then you're like, oh, I can't interact with that thing.
Unless
and
you're
so
using an iPhone, in which case there's never feedback.
Yeah, and so iPhone has this problem too, is like and I think designers there's certainly we've skewed towards minimalism where we don't want to like show a lot of things, but like that's where there's a struggle is people learn certain things, but they need that immediate feedback to understand like whether or not the assumption they made about the affordances that they're using were correct. So I think they actually go hand in hand a lot. Was like, yeah. The other, like another example in the book is it abstracts it out to how to use an oven. So I don't know what ovens look like in Europe, but in the US, you typically have an oven with like 4 burners or four stoves in a 2x2, and the handles to like change the heat. Sometimes they're laid out vertically, like above the oven. Sometimes they're and they're behind the burners. Sometimes they're in front of the burners. But what's interesting is like, and this is in the book, the layout of those controls to change the heat don't map directly to the layout of the burners. And so at first, like you have to look at the burners and you're like, wait, without icons to signify like which one maps to which, you're like, wait, so which one turns on the second burner? Which one turns on the third one? And so there's actually been like there are some ovens that are designed, or stovetops or hobs, I guess, I don't know if that's what people call them, but where the burners are actually laid out in the exact order that the stoves are. So it's like you, from the mental model, like you can look at the dials and immediately figure out, oh, this one turns on this one. And there's no instruction manual, we don't even need icons. It's just by mere fact of like the placement. That's the affordance, is that it's the layout affords how to turn on which one. And then there's other things about ovens too, like even the placement of the dials. Like it's probably not safe to reach over the burners when they're on, but so many cheap ovens are designed that way.
Nice.
Old ones used to
So,
have that around here, like where you had the grandma oven. I don't think, at least not in Italy, but I haven't seen them in Europe in general. These days, we have ovens as a separate thing compared to the hobs, and then the hobs generally have the 4 or 6 dials either on the bottom or on one side, generally speaking. But yeah, I remember back in the day, my grandma used to have like one of very old, probably from the 70s or 60s, like a single unit that had the dials at the back, and it was like, yeah, that's not great.
yeah, and and like affordances are like also how to use, like the other thing that is used a lot now is, so I think this is a very common pattern now with apps, but about, I would say 8 years ago, like the phone screen is only so big. And so one of the things was like, well, how do we tell the user that there's like more content? Like I think in like web design or like in newspaper design, it's like, people don't scroll. It's like there used to be this problem where it's like, oh, is the content above the fold or below the fold? And that phrase comes from newspapers. Like, if you want people to read a specific story, you have to have it above the fold, which is where the newspaper folded. Because, not every newspaper person, when they read the newspaper would unfold the paper, or like, when you bought a newspaper, it typically came folded, right? And you would see it in like a box or on the side of the road, and you're like, well, if the story I see is not interesting, I'm not going to buy that paper. And so that is extended into web design, and it was like people talk about like, well, are things above the fold or below the fold? And it's like, well, people scroll now, but the thing that actually afforded people to scroll is that they saw that there was more content.
Yeah, more
so
interesting
one
stuff.
Technique that thing people do is like when you create a list of content, or you have something that is infinitely scrollable or is longer than the viewport, which could be the newspaper or a mobile screen, you want to cut off content to like hint to the user, oh, there is more.
Yeah.
And then they know, oh, I should scroll. And now we kind of take that for granted, like, of course you would do that. But there was a time where we didn't do that. And so users were always like, oh, I'm not going to scroll. So I'm not going to scroll this like horizontal carousel, or I'm not going to keep scrolling on my phone with my finger because it doesn't look like I can. Yeah. So, I mean, that's why a lot of these list controls that you build always have like the item that is like slightly off the screen is never completely off the screen. It's like kind of hinting like, oh, there's like 12 pixels of it kind of poking out, and that's intentional because you're communicating to the user without telling them, hey, you should scroll, that they just know, oh, if it looks like there's more, I should keep going. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? I'm gonna
the scroll thing it's a fascinating gesture, because as you say, now we take it for granted, like you just scroll, right? I mean, you have this thumb that just scrolls, and then when it doesn't scroll, it feels weird. I mean, it was like, okay, what's going on here? I mean, the gesture felt, and I remember I had to tweet it at some point, because I found myself trying to actually scroll with the mouse, but not with the wheel. I was like clicking and dragging a web page, because using a mouse, it was like, okay, that's my brain. For some reason, it was like, okay, the click. Okay, I need to use the click to actually touch, and then I can actually scroll. And it was so fascinating because, like, first of all, Ivan, what the fuck? But the second, it was like, the gesture of actually pinning the screen with the pointer that you have at hand. It may be like a thumb or like a pointer or mouse point, and then just dragging the screen. It is so now inside my like muscle memory, or how we use tech, or how we actually process information, that this stuff is super fascinating for me. Yeah, and as you say, it's all over the place, and you notice when designers took the time to actually make a step towards you, right? Because the card that actually is a bit there, but because because you want to, or I remember at the time there was a moment they were asking me to make the list kinda scroll itself a bit, like an onboarding kind of thing. First time you land on the home page, you will just scroll a bit and then bounce back. And I remember the exact reason was one of the QA people had a phone that it was big, exactly how like 3 card views, right? So they were like, okay, so the card views, they were fitting perfectly on the screen, and they were like, okay, is it the list or not? And then, they started the conversation with the design team, like, this thing may be confusing at some level. So you see, when people put time into actually make it easier to use.
But when we're talking about affordances and telegraphing in a way, like I think that's the best way to think about affordances. Is it's a way to communicate intent or communicate, actually not intent but possibility of a certain interaction with to your users. And one affordance all of us have used while designing, with quote unquote designing an application, is, well, you've maybe you've put the link in the text, and how do you distinguish it from the rest of the text on the screen? Well,
Yeah.
you make it a different color, maybe the primary color, you make it bold, you make it stand out, you space it, maybe it's slightly bigger than the rest, maybe it has some padding around it, so it's also easier to click. That's something that Apple never freaking does. I hate it so much. I'm sorry. It's one of my biggest pet peeves with the iPhone. And yeah, that's like, you don't need to think about affordances as high effort things such as the list thing. It's the small things. You need to communicate to people that they can do something, so that they understand that it's something that they can maybe want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually maybe serendipitous, but like we've talked about color, layout, and typography, and all those design decisions actually tie back to affordances, because design, like the link color, right? At some point, maybe it's Google or Web 1.0 that popularized, like, oh, blue means link, that means I click it. And then got used to seeing underlines. So on the web, we're like, every time you see a blue underline, you can click that thing. And so in UIs, it's like color choice really matters, because there are certain colors that, if you're using an accent color and like the rest of your app is like, more or less black and white, then the accent colors kind of afford to the user, oh, I can, like, these things are interactive, or like there's something I should be paying attention here. Or even the size of things, like the size of things is an affordance. So like, what is the most important thing on a page? And it's like, maybe the biggest thing is, and so the user is more likely to engage with that because it's bigger. I think, and then what's the other one? Not layout, but back to the mouse. So that's one of the interesting things about affordances is, when the mouse is one of the things that desktop software does really well, which was a big struggle with mobile and touch, is you have a mouse cursor. So this thing is kind of like flying around the screen, and typically it's just this black arrow, but as soon as you hover over something, the cursor changes, and the cursor changing to different types of cursors was also an affordance, because if you hover over on the web, like if you hover over something that's clickable, it should be the hand that goes like this. Some don't do that, and it's actually, if you use an anchor tag, it does it automatically. But and I've been a criminal. This is like, we made a lot of divs in the past, and so you would just make divs clickable. Like you would put hrefs on divs, but it wouldn't automatically set the cursor to be the pointer. It would be the black arrow. And so people would kind of like fly around the UI, and they're like, I don't know what I can click and what I can't click. And so that cursor was always a really useful way to communicate to people, like, what they can interact with. And like the drag thing is really important. Like in design tools, when you're clicking and dragging the canvas, it changes to the hand, and then it changes to like a closed hand to signify that you're grabbing something. So all of those things are affordances, because it's constantly reinforcing to you that like, this is how you use this surface that you're hovering over. And hover in itself, we have in desktop software hover states, and I think not enough people use hover states. But with mobile, right, you don't have hover, and you can't change the cursor because the cursor is your hand or your finger. So it became even harder to figure out like what are the affordances we could build for mobile that people would understand. And so I think to an extent that's why a lot of the early designs in mobile looked so much like the desktop, because we were like, okay, we can't. It's a new paradigm, but the only way people are going to learn is like if we show them something they're familiar with, which was desktop software, which ended up being kind of a disaster in a lot of cases, like with Windows Mobile, because
but you had the start menu.
Yeah, the start menu was on the Windows Mobile device, and I remember seeing that for the first time. And I used to work in Microsoft before Google, and I was an intern when the iPhone 3GS came out, and I remember I had gotten it for my birthday, and I compared it to the Windows Mobile phone at the time, because Windows Phone 7 didn't exist, and Android I think was just getting started. And I was like, you could tell it's just night and day of like who was actually thinking about the proper affordances for mobile versus not. And yeah, Windows was like, well, there's a start menu, so people know how to use Windows, they'll know how to use this device. And it's like, yeah, but the start menu doesn't make any sense on mobile.
Yeah.
But it was there. But it was probably
there.
for a good reason, which was like, hey, early on, we didn't really know how to communicate to people how to use this device. And so let's go with something that people might be used to. But in the end, they probably should have rethought it. So, which they did, but
too late.
That's a different story.
Yeah.
But I will say on the Windows Phone thing, so when I was working there, that was one of the interesting things, was when Windows or Microsoft went to this very flat language, design language, which they called Metro. A lot of people were like, what I don't like about Metro is I don't know what's interactive. Like everything's flat, so it's like, what is a button?
That's
like
the Windows 8, everything is a square thing, right?
Yeah. Or it was even before that, like when Windows Phone 7 came out, because you would have an app in Windows Phone 7 and you would see like text. And it was very much we call it a design pattern in Windows Phone, where text was interactive. Like you would click text in like a list, and then that would navigate to the details. But it wasn't clear because it was just like a line of text. And there was no feedback. The only feedback you had, I think, is when you tapped it, it would navigate. But then when you just looked at it, it just looked like text, and it wasn't blue. There was no arrow. There was no like outline around the list items. So you were like, is this a list? I don't know.
All the screens look the same on Windows Phone.
Yeah. So going flat was like great in some ways, but really bad in other ways, because a lot of affordances that people learned over time were gone.
I was thinking, was the Zune the first device that used that sort of UI language?
It was, yeah.
Ha.
I was a big fan of the Zune, but
one day I'll own one. I will never be able to use it, but I'll own one.
Oh, I actually have one here.
Oh.
It doesn't work. Wait, where is it? Oh, I don't think it's working, but I have the box. No, this is a Zune. This is a Zune HD.
Ah, fancy.
Yeah. This is when they added the scroll wheel, like the iPod.
Fair enough.
But the scroll wheel, that was a good example, because you would use it to navigate the UI. You wouldn't, because the screens were not good enough to just touch. They weren't capacitive touch screens. But as you were scrolling, there was feedback, because as you scrolled, you could feel the wheel moving, so you knew you were moving to the next item. And then you could also see, like, as I would say, like, the selected state was moving around the list, you could see the text kind of like flashing or growing. And so again, these were like affordances reinforcing like, oh, there is a direct relationship between the scroll wheel and the UI, and like this is how I manipulate things, because you couldn't touch the screen. Oh. Let's see. Actually, so I think I was going to show this example in Compose. Are we? I think I'm sharing my screen. I don't know.
Yes, let me switch. Oh, shrine.
Yes.
Did you design shrine?
I did not. It was before my Google time.
Ah,
But I had a lot of fun rebuilding it in Compose because it wasn't fully built in Views. It was actually built in Flutter at one point. And so I was like,
Bum,
a lot of
bum, bum.
yeah. Material team loves Flutter. But I used that a lot to kind of model what I actually building this and streaming it as well. But it's a good example actually because there are some things I added to it that were not in the original spec that I think speak to the affordance thing. So in Compose and actually in Android, right, we're so used to the ripple. Like the ripple's like, oh, that's feedback for like what is tappable or clickable. Can you see the ripple in here? I can zoom in. Maybe. Let's see.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so here with interactive preview, like this ripple's really big, right? And it's like, but the thing is that is not the default. So, you can add clickable modifiers to anything, right? So one thing I did, which ties into affordances and feedback, is I made the ripple way bigger than it should be. Because initially
nice.
when I was doing this, like you could, when I first, in some of the streams I have, like you can make anything clickable and then a ripple will be generated. But like what I did initially was, so for this icon, which is this cutoff icon, I originally had a clickable modifier that just was just there, but the clickable modifier only gets as big as the thing that it's modifying. So with the icon's only, I think in this case, it's 24 by 24. And so here I can kind of show you like the modifier equals, we can just add a clickable modifier just for the sake of argument. Not going to do anything. And then let me just remove this toggle thing because we don't need it at the moment. Oop, comma. Now we're live coding. This is bad.
I mean,
Nice.
we have a very
This is what we do.
supportive viewership. And they're used to my code, which is worse than whatever you can do. It might actually be the first time the code actually works first time on this stream.
Don't jinx it, Sebastian. Don't jinx
it. It does. It shows.
So here, right? Now, if the icon is the thing that toggles the menu, if you add a click modifier, that's how big it is. It's tiny.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, it works, but so I guess another thing which we can probably talk even more about is like touch target size. But
yeah,
one of the things is like this touch target size is really small, but it works. But what I did is like like when you tap it, you can't even see the ripple because your finger covers it.
Yeah.
And so
because now you're using the mouse, so that's why we can actually see it. But if you use a finger, good luck with that. Yeah. That's right.
And I'm zoomed in, so this is like really big, right? So one thing you can do, which I really like about Compose, is like, and this actually ties into interaction design. I'll talk about this in a sec, but what I did is still toggleable. If you've used it, it's similar to clickable, but I think it manages the state a little bit better. But you can change the ripple size. And so what I did was like, okay, rather than making just the icon clickable, I want to make this entire, I guess I have to exit interactive mode, but I want to make this entire top left area a tappable region, because the touch target for that icon is way too small, because I think it's only about 24 by 24. And really the minimum touch target should be 44 by 44 at a minimum.
Yeah.
But even when I did make it 44 by 44, when I was using it on my device, it still felt too small. And so I was like, you know what, let's make this entire target for this toggling the menu back and forth 56, at least 50, or not 56, but I think it ends up being at least 46 wide. And then I think the top app bar always ends up being about, I think the default might be 56 height. So it's 46 by 56. So it's a bigger touch target. But I actually went even extra. And I said, you know, I actually want the ripple to not be bounded. So I want that nice circle effect. And then I want the radius of the ripple to be bigger. So the radius is just a visual effect. Yeah.
So you can change the radius like this. I mean, you just put a dimension there and that's it. And it gets that bigger.
Yeah. So now when I click it, right, oh, come on. Oh, wait, I have to rebuild.
By the way, while it rebuilds, the equivalent in the old view system would be to use the what is I don't remember the name of the API, but there's a specific way to say actually take the touch events in an area that is this much bigger or this much smaller than the actual bounds of the view. I'll find it.
So now, like, you can see the ripple's way bigger.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah.
But then if you look at, I mean, we're looking at this and zooming in, but, you know, if we actually go to like the backdrop component and look at it more in the context of a screen, it's much easier to see when you click it like this versus like if I had just made the icon clickable, it works, like I said, but it's so small. And this is actually a nice thing about Android that iOS doesn't really do well is like, always giving you feedback about like if something is tappable. And so it's interesting because a lot of designers who are from iOS or designed for iOS don't take that in consideration. And then it trickles down to Android where, and I've seen this multiple times now for Compose, like through Kotlin Lang, Slack, or Stack Overflow, or even Twitter, like people asking like, can I get rid of the ripple? And it's like, no, don't do that.
The answer is yes, but don't.
Yes, but don't. It's like, if you do get rid of it, be sure that there is some feedback to the user that, like, because it goes back to affordances, is like people need feedback that something is tappable. And the reason we have the ripple and compose by default is because we made this design decision early on that it's like, this is a really great affordance to tell people what is interactive. And we should keep it, and we should make it so that it's just the default. So you have to opt out of it if you really don't want it, because we think it's a powerful enough concept that it really should be the default. But yeah, I think you can change the radius to something arbitrary. Like maybe if we make it 256, it's gonna get really big.
Ooh. It's gonna be the whole screen. Although it's gonna be limited to the box, I guess, right? Or to the box parent, actually.
Yeah, so you can see it extend all the way there.
I mean, could be worse.
Works, you know. Yeah, but no, so that's not in the original Shrine design spec. But I thought it was like a nice touch that we could add because it's like, hey, one, there's the visual feedback of the ripple itself, but the thing I wanted to say, which I think you were talking about, Sebastiano, is like being able to make the touch target bigger than it visually looks. If we go back to, I don't think it was covered by Don Norman in Design of Everyday Things, but eventually there was this distinction in design, in UI design, between the physical target and the effective target. So the physical target is like what it looks like visually to you. So you could call it visual target because this is not physical. But the effective target is actually how big is the target to the system. So in this case, like the user might think, oh, the target for the icon is only like this little thing here in the corner, but the effective target is way bigger. But the nice thing about software is like you can create effective targets that are much larger than they look visually, and it actually helps the user along the way. So this has been done a lot with, it was done a lot with desktop design in the early days, but it's even more important with mobile because you don't have the mouse to give you feedback on, with the affordances, and your fingers are so big, the fat finger thing. And so, so that distinction is a design thing that is actually part engineering, part design. It's like, and I think designers actually, until they build things, sometimes forget that. So engineers often kind of fill the gaps of like, hey, like, could we make this effective target bigger than it actually appears to be? With buttons, it's easy because it's like, oh, the button is like whatever within the button visual bounds is the click target. But you might run into situations like here where it's like, well, this is not a button, but it is interactive. So how can we make this as easy as possible to interact with? Which is tied to this other thing called Fitts Law.
Ivan, are you taking notes?
Yeah, sure.
I don't remember the first name of this person, but in interaction design, this is specifically for UI design or digital. There was this, it's a law, it's not a law of physics, but it's like a design kind of, it's a theory or law, I guess, that has been scientifically tested, which I probably have to actually Google it because I want to make sure I'm actually saying this correctly. So we learned this as designers for interaction design. Is like Fitts Law is basically, it's a way to measure how good something is from a targeting perspective. It was used a lot with a mouse. So it's this predictive model that says like I guess we could just say the usability of this target is often a function of the distance you have to travel to interact with it, and also proportional to the size of the target. So what it means in practice is the farther the target is and the smaller it is, the harder it is to interact with. So with desktop design with the mouse, they were using this to basically test like how usable a UI was. So, desktop screens are quite big and your mouse is really small. And so they would use it to you can use it actually now today to measure like how good a mouse is. Like when I was in university, we did these tests where we're like, okay, take all the pointer devices you have. You can take your normal mouse, you could take an ergonomic mouse, vertical mouse, you could use like a Wii controller or a PS2 controller, anything that can like move the cursor, and basically run these tests to figure out which one is the best pointer device. And so you could run these tests and you could easily see like, okay, this is the best pointer device, but it actually tied to design because it's like the target has to be a certain size. And so when we're designing UIs, like a lot of the reasons we try to put things closer to your context is because we don't want, like the farther you have to travel with your mouse, the more likely you're going to like miss your target. And if the target's small, it's even more likely you're going to miss it. So like there's a reason why toolbars often tend to be in the corners, because corners are actually easier for you to travel with a mouse. Like if you put a toolbar in the middle of the screen, the toolbar it's hard because you have to basically be very precise, get the mouse to fly directly into this like 32 by 32 rectangle and then click it. And even for a mouse, which is very precise, that can be challenging. So there's a lot of thought put into like where interactive elements are placed in desktop, and it's also the same for mobile. So that's why we try to place things to the sides of the screen, because your fingers, oftentimes you're using the device with one hand. So it's like, how close does your finger have to travel to interact with something? And the farther it is, the more likely you're going to miss the target. And the smaller it is, the more likely you're going to miss it.
It's also historically why things like the buttons on Windows on desktop are on the corners of the window, on Mac on top left, and on Windows and Linux on top right, generally speaking, right? because that, as you said, you can just move the cursor in the general direction of top left or top right, and it will eventually converge into the corner. So closing a window is very easy because just swing the mouse and click at some point.
Yeah, basically.
And actually, like on Mac OS, the reason that main menu is always in the top left corner is because it's pretty easy to access. Like, because the other thing is like in Windows, right? Like a lot of times the menus for applications are right below the window header. And if your window is not full screen, to target the menu is actually kind of hard.
Yeah.
And so that's why on Mac, they made this design decision, which, you know, some people hate, some people love, but it's always in a consistent place and it's always in the top left corner because it's easier to fling your mouse to the top and click something than it is to like move your mouse somewhere in the middle of the screen to target a menu. So, yeah. And I think on the chat, Mark was saying, yeah, I don't know if it is, but I'm pretty sure it is because this Fitts law thing I think was established maybe in the 80s. Yeah, I actually Googled, like, if you Google Fitts study, there's this old Windows application you can use to test stuff, which I used in college. But it's a really fun exercise. You can take any pointing device and use it and basically run these tests, and it will run you through this like click test. So you kind of just like click. Yes, exactly. If you click I don't know if I'm sharing the desktop. Maybe you can share it now.
That would be a pain to switch.
Okay. Maybe I can try it. I will. Let's see. Switch screen or window. I wonder if I can use a tab.
Let me see. I'm trying to figure out how I can. Okay, maybe I have a way to share it. Just wait one sec. Let me try.
I can do it.
Yes. Haha. Okay. Let me close some stuff down though, because I have plenty of it open. Okay. Okay. And okay. Now you're seeing my screen. So you said yeah, I cannot share it on Skype though. I'm sorry about that. You're gonna have to look at it from, because otherwise that I would have to switch again and again. So let me extract this somewhere and hope for the best. I mean, it only extracted one. Extract all the things. Okay. Are we testing my mouse prowess now, or?
Are you actually using the app, or are you?
Yeah, I am. I am subject ID number 3.
Yeah, I can't remember how it works, but like you can basically start a trial and you can try to click those little dots. It will indicate to you which ones to click. I think it's in blue. And as you go through it, once you complete the trials, it will then graph to you like, well, how well you did, but also how good is this pointing device.
I'm pretty terrible at this. Oh, that was a red. I done goofed. 5%. Is that good? Oh no! Oh no! This is no. Okay, this is more fun than it should be. But also, I'm so bad.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Like when I was doing it, like I said, I was using like a vertical mouse or like a regular mouse, and then I was like, I know the Nintendo Wii remote is going to be a terrible pointing device, but I'm just going to scientifically prove it's terrible.
It's terrible, but how terrible?
Yeah. So I hooked it up to Bluetooth and then tried to use it to like move the mouse across the screen, which was very hard. but yeah, you can use it to compare the effectiveness of your pointing devices and see, oh yeah, this is the best mouse. But part of the test is like it's showing you like it's touch targets and just effective targets in general matter a lot for like how usable something is. And often, we sometimes ignore this. Like even, I don't think this happens a lot with, but like I've noticed sometimes when you have like a new desktop application that has like a tree in it with like expand collapse arrows, the target to expand and collapse the tree is the literal icon, the arrow icon, which is very, very small.
Yes.
And so it's like, okay, well, you should change the effective target. And so the same thing happens in mobile. It's like you really should think about how to make the touch targets bigger because like 44 is the default, but that is still pretty small for most people.
So I stopped because it was getting pretty embarrassing. But hey, it's been a long time since I used the Windows Forms application, so there's that.
Yeah, this one's a pretty old application. Yep. That was a tangent.
That was, but it was a fun tangent. Playing with Fitzlow application. It's not something that I expected doing, but I did.
So, Chris, I'm wondering. So you started going over Shrine, right? To improve, if possible, ever possible, over affordance. But I'm curious about what's your approach when you do something like that. Something that I'm aware that you probably excuse me, are gonna see way more patterns or anti-patterns than a developer with no design experience can see. But how do you approach this, and how you teach how to approach these things?
I think it's so I think one of the things which is it sounds very basic, but is like just trying it. Like the reason the touch target thing came up even for me was because like I made that icon clickable in the first place, and then I was just trying the app on my phone, and I was like, it worked, but I was like, I felt like oftentimes when I was trying to tap that top right, top left corner, it wasn't registering the tap like maybe 20% of the time. And I was like, that seems is something wrong with my code? And I was like, well, maybe if I make the touch target bigger, it will, it'll be better. And I was like, oh, this is actually better. And then I was like, well, could this kind of ties to targeting, but it's like, let's say I made the touch target of the icon 44 by 44. So it is a minimum touch target size. The fact that that icon is in the top left, I was like, there is some padding, you notice, or I don't know if I'm still sharing my screen. Am I?
Nope, I can switch back to it. There you go.
So let me zoom in. So the fact is, like, this top app bar, right, there's some padding on the left and there's some padding on the right. So it is pushed in a bit or inset in. So I could have made, like, this is the actual size of the target, or an example like this square. So that could be the target, but then this part here isn't interactive. And so if for some reason my finger drifted over here, which it could, it may not register the tap. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not even using this area. So really the target should be this big, because I think for the user, it's much easier to just try to tap this general corner and then this will work.
That's actually very, very, very clever, because by instinct, I will probably just go, with my fat finger hitting the whole corner with a probably just a hope that, I will actually click everything. The same thing will go for the magnifier icon on the right. I mean, my instinct, they will be just to click the corner, like hoping that the clickable area is large enough.
Yeah, actually, it's a good example because right now, the way I wrote this, it's just an icon. So
Yeah.
if I were to try to make this interactive, it's only going to be this big. It's partially the reason why this composable icon button, I think it is larger than it usually is, because let's see, I think it's, where's the sizing? Oh yes, here. So IconButton actually has a modifier with minimum touch target size,
Oh, nice.
but the icon button's a nice component to use because if you want to actually make an icon interactive, you can just put it in here. Probably, I don't know why I have an error. Oh, anyway.
Missing a click handler, probably.
Yeah, probably. Yes.
Yeah, fair enough.
Anyway.
So
this makes it
comes for free.
bigger.
If you have an icon and you want to make it clickable, you just put it in a IconButton, and a lot of stuff is taken care. Oh yeah, now I see it's actually padded a bit. It's way more clickable than before.
Yeah, so
it's
now
a bit
you
off
have the
center
ripple
because of the modifier on the icon, but apart from
yeah,
that,
Ben, I bet is triggering you very, 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 very much, Sebastian.
nah, just a bit.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
It's just gonna eye twitching for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, and part of that is because like when I was building this, like I didn't make it interactive, so I was trying to make it visually placed exactly where the spec had it. But if I were to try to make it interactive, which we are kind of doing live, so now it's like it's not off center, but it's still kind of far from the right, which was not my intention. And so I would probably have to go back and figure out like, okay, actually, maybe,
it should be fine without that.
I don't even need this.
Yeah.
And then maybe it will actually
should be fine because then the icon is 24 and then you have the 12 dips of margin of padding that you had before are enforced by the minimum size.
Here you go.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. I think there are other gotchas which designers actually are guilty of as well. As on touch, it's actually, this is really hard now because we have so many swipe gestures.
Oh, God.
But one thing to always think about is like the directionality of your swipe gesture should not conflict with like other, I guess, actually, so good examples, like let's say you have a horizontal, like a lazy row or like a carousel which has multiple cards in it, right? The swipe gestures, you scroll from right to left or left to right, so you're scrolling horizontally. People will sometimes put other scrollable content in those cards, which also scroll horizontally. And so it's like it's very hard for the user to like precisely scroll which element. And so it's like by doing that, you're actually setting up the user for failure. And so it's like you always want to make sure that your gestures don't conflict in direction. And Apple is guilty of this because sometimes like there are some UIs where like you expect to swipe to dismiss something, but then like within that swipe to dismiss, there's something that is also horizontally swipeable. And it's just like you often get into this point where you're like, your gesture is like doing the wrong thing because it's trying to do two gestures at the same time in the same direction. And it's like, you want to make sure that your gestures try to be as like perpendicular. Yeah, actually a good example is in Instagram. If you've used Instagram with stories, people put the slider on like their stories, like you can, it's one of those like interactive stickers, but the slider is horizontal and the gesture to go to the next story is horizontal. So if you're not careful, you often will like try to swipe the slider and then you swipe the story instead. And so it's like, I think people still want that slider, but the notion is like, if you put a slider on your story, now this is getting too deep into like how people craft or design their stories, but you should probably make that slider a little bigger so that people don't miss slide the story. And yeah, but that's one of the things that happens a lot with mobile is like the swipe gestures conflict.
Yeah, the double swipe. We had an episode on the project that I'm working on at the moment. So we had a carousel at the top. So we were estimated everything. You know how it is. So, oh yeah, it's just a carousel. You know, we can do it like. And then we realized that actually the screen that we were working on, where we were supposed to put the carousel, is actually a view pager. So basically, you have the carousel, but the whole screen it was actually swiping. Why? Because it's a view pager, and then we realized, okay, well now how does it work, right? And we ended up with a temporary solution because we needed to disable the horizontal swipe, so that you can't swipe the pager anymore because we are prioritizing the carousel. And we ended up actually mirroring the iOS app because the iOS app at the beginning they don't have a swipeable pager, so you only had tabs at the top. And when we added actually the swipeable thing, everybody was like, "Oh my god, this is so cool! It's even better than iOS." And now we actually are going back because introducing the carousel, it messed up the horizontal scroll, and now we have a ticket. And in the future, we want to start. Actually, we want to, start handling the touch events manually to create this thing that when you reach the end of the carousel you actually swipe the pager. So
I think a nested scroll should do that for you.
Yeah, but that was the there's a lot of stuff moving in, but
you're being fancy. You're being fancy is what you're saying.
Well, I'm no fancy, sir. I'm no fancy. I mean, that's the rest of the team. I'm more like the backstage person. But yeah, that's something that it gets complicated very quickly when you want to swipe. I get that.
There's a question for you, Chris, from Mark, which is if you have any tips for making, I guess we're talking about nested scrolling, more intuitive for users when you really cannot avoid it. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, don't is also good answer.
Yeah,
yeah,
that is a good, because I actually there was a recent post on Kotlin Lang about this with Compose where someone was asking how to do something like this, and I looked at it and was like, I know you're technically asking about a performance question, but the design the person was making was like, from an interaction design perspective, it was like, this looks crazy. It's like, I think the question was like, the person had a lazy column, and within the lazy column, each item was a lazy row. And then within the lazy row, each thing was a card. And within the card, there were lazy columns. And I'm like, wait. So
wait, what?
I can scroll. I might be exaggerating, but it was like to that complexity. And I was like, from a performance perspective, I don't know how it's going to work out. But from a design perspective, I'm like, that is a very hard UI to use. There's so much nested scrolling everywhere. And so I think with mobile, it's like, I think a few tips is like, maybe the best thing is to propose to not nest the scrolling if you can avoid it. Like, I think with mobile, like, it's okay to separate things out into different screens or like different surfaces, because you only have so much screen real estate. And so I think that's one thing I think like designers or people who've worked on desktop software for a long time, they don't realize these things, and they carry these things over into mobile design, and it's just like you don't have a mouse, you don't have that precision, so it's not going to work as well as you think it is, even though you're trying to fit as much on the screen as possible. And from the user experience point of view, it's like, depending on what the workflow is or what the task is that they're trying to complete, it may be simpler to just separate it out into different pieces, like different screens, or because it will make the code less complex, it will make the nested scrolling go away, but it'll also make it maybe simpler for the user in general. But if you can't avoid it, I think there's a lot of, I would say one thing I've thought about with nested scrolling is like the difference with like view pager is a good example. Like the snapping behavior is really powerful. Like the snapping behavior of a view pager is powerful because it requires the user to be less precise with the scrolling. Like one of the things is like, it's, you know, sometimes it's cool that you can like fling a lazy row or something, and it like the whole thing moves with velocity and you have this free scrolling thing, but it's like sometimes that's not very precise. Like what if the user just wants to like get to item 4 very easily? So I think often the snapping behavior is a really useful way to make nested scrolling like easier to use. It's like trying to just give more control for of the scrolling to the user. And so you might instinctually just use like lazy roll and like use a scrollable modifier or whatever, but sometimes the snapping is actually beneficial because it makes it easier for the user to navigate or scroll through in complex cases.
I would add one thing to this answer, if I may, which is there are very few cases, there are few, but they exist, where nested scrolling makes sense, but only if they are orthogonal, right? So
Yeah.
you might have a vertical scrolling and then horizontally scrolling contents, like the Netflix UI, for example. Like that's a valid case in which to use nested scrolling. But when you start having two things that are nested and scroll in the same axis, maybe don't.
Yeah, and that's exactly when we were talking about that earlier with the conflicting swipe gestures, right? It's like that happens all the time with nested scrolling. What's interesting too is part of it is it's actually at the toolkit or framework level that these things can be better or worse. So one thing when we were building Compose is like you can run into that issue like with pagers, right? It's like, okay, well, what if like if I have a pager, it's going to register the horizontal swipe gesture to move to the different items, but there might be vertical scrolling content. So then the question is like, if the user doesn't do an exact, 180 or a very precise horizontal scroll, like maybe they kind of do it diagonally, or their finger kind of drifts in like a U. How do we handle that in the API? Like what swipe gestures actually can get fired off? And there's actually a lot of subtlety in like the math and the velocity, but getting those details right is more on our responsibility, but it plays out because if that ends up being bad, then like it's super hard for developers to implement any nested scrolling because the gestures are just misfiring it all the time.
Yeah, it's going to be flaky. The outcome is going to be unpredictable, and at that point, you don't want to use it. I understand.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the orthogonal rule is always a really good tip. Like, you really don't want things to be in parallel or in conflict, whether that's vertical or horizontal. But even just revisiting design, it's like maybe this should really be broken out into different screens or different steps if it can be, if you can do that.
That was a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the world of interaction design is very big. I know there's people that do just that as their main job, right? So
Yeah.
as with everything in this series, we're not aiming to make everyone a professional something designer, but but we're trying to give you the big picture idea of what is what and why some things are important, and maybe hopefully, like, if you don't have a designer maybe giving you some pointers to what you need to learn or just get better at to be able to design your own app, or if you do have a designer, then this will allow hopefully everyone to talk with their designers in a shared language and understand each other, because otherwise when someone goes to their designer and the designer starts talking about affordances and they're like, but what is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
And
part that I'm also sorry, Chris, please.
oh no, go ahead.
Well, I agree with Sebastian. I mean, I will probably always gonna leverage the knowledge of a designer because everybody has their job. So I can code, but the people for the better can design. But having an ubiquitous language, having the minimum domain knowledge to be able to communicate with the design team, it's critical at some level, right? I mean, when you start also when you reach a point as a software developer where you also look at the product and not just at the Jira tickets that they throw at you, knowing how to talk and communicate with the design team, it's crucial. Like, it's part of being a professional. It's just not somebody in a cave that just clicks on a keyboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing for designers. Like I know there's this struggle, but I'm not saying designers should code, but it's important to understand the constraints and the materials that you're working with, whatever you're building. And so like being able to communicate with the engineer realistically with like what you're using is something designers should be aware of. It's like, okay, you make this design, but like how feasible is it? And it's like, we don't want to necessarily constrain the designer to be like, we can only do so much, but like understanding the constraints is actually powerful because then you can understand how to push the constraints. But if you don't invest in the time to understand like how do you build Android apps, or like you don't have to be an expert in the view system, but it's like, is something like padding, how does that even work in Compose or views or in HTML? And I think at least the web has been more approachable for designers, but I always encourage designers to really dig into understanding the technical constraints because it helps a lot in the conversation about the trade-offs you make with the designs. We don't suffer the consequences of this are not as real in software because if designer makes an assumption and we design bad software, it might like ruin someone's day, but like they'll still live. But my analogy is always with like architecture and construction. It's like the architect actually has to be licensed to understand how materials work, like the physics of things, because if you design a house that then collapses, someone will die. And so it's like, the architect cannot be completely removed from the real world constraints of physics and materials. And I think that's the same with software design. It's like designers should not be completely removed from the constraints that software has. Like they need to understand it to make the best solution possible. But that's where the innovation comes in, is when you push those constraints and you deliver something that people didn't expect.
Nice.
Yeah. And
so we have a question, Sebastian. Do you think we have a couple of minutes for?
Yeah, let's take the last question
think,
because it's a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is an image. I checked the image. It's not. It's legit.
It's not
it's
porn.
safe
Yeah,
for work.
I checked it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we have very interesting people in the chat, so I clicked before you could share the screen.
Yeah. No, I was looking at this too while we were talking. No, this is a good example. So there's a couple things. And this is actually pertains more to Android than iOS, but one thing off the bat that is tricky about this is the drag and drop targets, which are these little horizontal lines on the right, they are very close to the edge of the screen. So if one is not careful, as you move those things up and down, that could be registered as a back gesture instead of moving them up and down for drag and drop. So that could have, because in Android, there's a right jet, like you can swipe either on the left or the right of the screens to go back. If you have it enabled, which on my Pixel 6 it is enabled. But that could be a problem here because the user is going to instinctually, the affordance is like, oh, there's a drag affordance on the right. I'm going to put my finger there and then start doing it. And if I'm not precise going up and down, it could register as a back gesture. Like especially if they're like trying to fling it. But putting that aside, let's pretend there are no back gestures. One thing I would say is, if you have a situation like this, like one thing you can do to break it up is you can actually have modes. So I think iOS does this a lot more than Android, but in horizontal lists, like when you're vertical. When you're reordering vertical lists, you have to be in a specific mode to do it. So like if you're not in the edit mode, then the list, when you scroll across the list, it just goes up and down. But when you hit edit, then the list becomes like a specific context where like only certain gestures work. So I think in this case, like that could be a way to improve it is like, does the user need to be able to drag and drop these things like by like right when they get to the screen? Or should it be like, hey, do you want to actually go to an edit mode and then enable the drag and drop? That's one thing to consider. The other thing is, one thing about drag and drop, I will say as a designer is like, always think about like, why do you have drag and drop? Drag and drop's cool, but sometimes it's not the best gesture to use. Sometimes it's not the best interaction to rearrange things. Like, I would say on mobile, it's probably a better gesture because you can use your finger. But like people do drag and drop a lot on like desktop, and it's just like, it's actually not as precise as like just clicking an up arrow or a down arrow. And so sometimes, like oftentimes it's like worth reevaluating, like is drag and drop the right interaction to put here? So yeah, there's a lot of questions there, but I think, it's like one is making sure it doesn't conflict with other gestures, which in this case could be the back gesture. So I guess one thing I would do is because this is an Android, I might make the list a little narrower so that the drag target is not so close to the edge.
Also,
but
because
again,
the items, they're like the text on the items is not that much, so you can afford to make them narrower, right?
The other thing too, which I don't know if this may not happen out of the box, but like the other part is like with drag and drop is like to even though the affordance to start the dragging is on the right, which is this icon, it would be useful for the user to be able to just drag from the center. Like if they can rearrange from the center, then that would be useful. The tricky part there is with feedback. So the only way the users, so we're looking at a still screenshot, but like if we were to actually animate this or code this up, another way to afford to the user that you can drag this in other places besides the icon on the right is as soon as you put your finger down in the middle, there could be like a highlight state where it's like the whole row becomes highlighted. And then to the user, it signals to them, oh, it's registering that I'm actually tapping and dragging this thing. Because sometimes what people do is they only allow you to drag if your thumb is, if the gesture is initiated on the icon on the right. And that, I think that's part of the effective target thing we were saying before is like, with drag and drop, it's like you should be able to drag the whole row, but the user's not going to know that unless you actually provide the visual feedback of as they start dragging, do you highlight the whole row? So that's like I think Spotify on iOS is guilty of this. Is like it doesn't really highlight the whole row. It just like So I think that's one thing to make dragging better. Anyway, there's a lot of considerations, but
There is a lot of stuff. Yeah. But I see the tiny icon target to drag and drop very often. You know that at some point there is like an icon that you actually have to click to drag and drop. You know that it's not on the whole row, as you say, and that feels always weird because it's always on the left, and then you're like reaching out with the thumb to drag and drop things. So that's it's hard. And
yeah, and I think to tie back to the system, right? Like one thing in Android is because you have these back gesture regions on the left and the right, the OS has to make sure that like that gesture is not registered as something else that the app wants to do. I don't know like the subtlety there, but like this actually has happened to me frequently with Instagram. Is like I'll swipe to the next story, but then like because my finger is like for some reason when I did the swipe gesture, it was too close to the edge of the screen. It goes back instead of going to the next story.
Oh, that's the worst.
So I turned down the sensitivity on the right side because of that. But yeah, that is a challenge here as well because that drag icon is so close to the right edge, like it could misfire as a back gesture.
Yeah.
So
nice. That's a lot of stuff. Thank you. Sebastiano, what do you think? Do we want to run the giveaway?
Do it. Run it.
So roll. Here we go.
Boom.
Afzal.
Afzal. Yeah, lucky today.
It's a good day, sir. Or actually, yeah, I'm assuming. Sorry, but there was more like a figure of speech. So I'm adding you as a friend. I'm adding you as a friend, and I'm gonna reach out to get an address. So congratulations for the stickers and seeing that you are actually, yeah, basically that's I agree. Considering that you are one of the subscribers and you're supporting the channel, you also get the look at this thing,
shiny.
the holo sticker, the shiny holo sticker. So check your Twitch friends request. We are gonna reach out to you and we can get your address.
Yes.
Thanks.
Because
we are wrapping up.
Yeah, before that, I just want to say after you're done with the event stuff, there's the big announcement. We've done the announcement already on Sunday, but I want to remind people that they really do want to be here on Sunday and on Wednesday especially. So
yes. So for the giveaways, we are running the usual. Well, I said usual because we have been giving away so many IntelliJ license that now is like feels like the usual thing. It's $150 usual. So if you want an IntelliJ Ultimate 100% discount code for 1 year. You can go to the video that I linked and add a comment and cross your fingers, and we are gonna raffle 1 license on the next episode. So good luck with that. IntelliJ, we got a new version yesterday, so that's like fresh from the oven. So get it right now. What else? We have I have been posting to the chat. We have a couple of news about how you can support the stream. We have a coffee page and a few membership that you can pick. According to what you pick, you get access to the Discord server, the source code of our private projects, and a lot of cool stuff. You can access the Telegram group right away, so you don't need to be a subscriber to join the Telegram group. So it's a good first step.
I
And
would
then
also add, amongst the perks of the coffee membership, there is the access to Discord server. But we kind of felt like we didn't want to didn't want to leave out our Twitch subscribers. So if you're a Twitch subscriber, you can look for the Code with Italian server on Discord, and you should get access to it automatically. The important thing that you do is that you go in your Discord settings and you link your Twitch account so the bots know who is who and they can let you in. Yeah, that was it. I also, sorry, while we are talking about memberships, I just want to thank everyone that has already joined and donated. We are, I think, 2/3 of the way to our first goal, which is 200 euros to be able to hire a designer for bundle.
yes,
Because I feel
that's
less
great.
guilty if I can ask someone, hey, can you redesign this for me? But I can actually pay you. Like
Yes,
it's a
that's
token of gratitude, of course,
yes.
but still, I would much rather have like the ability to, give something back to someone that helps us with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, considering what Chris and Javier were able to do in 30 seconds on my app for free live the other week, imagine if we can pay somebody like them for like a couple of hours. Imagine that. But yeah, we are almost through. We are very grateful for the support. There are a few ways to support. There is also the merchandising. If you like the t-shirts and the mug, we are running a Black Friday kind of thing. There is like 20% discount code until end of the year. So happy Christmas to everybody. And yeah. So Sebastiano, what are the guests? Who are the guests?
So, well, first of all, on Sunday, we are going on with the work on screenshot testing. I actually did talk to Jose in the meantime, and we pretty much got to the conclusion that screenshot testing is not really a supported scenario. So we are on our own. And
Okay.
the big thing is in a week we're gonna have Jake Wharton and Leland Richardson, and we're gonna be talking about Compose internals. I don't know specifically exactly about what. We're still defining that, but I don't think there's any way this can turn out not being incredibly interesting. So I'm looking forward to that and to seeing you all there, and hopefully many more.
Yeah, and I promise that I'm not gonna bring up Flutter.
Yeah, please don't. I think there's gonna be enough discussions as it is.
Yeah, I'm just gonna wait it out. I don't need to. Somebody in the chat, I'm pretty sure that somebody's gonna ask about Flutter at some point.
Yeah, maybe we can tell the bot to ban people that mention Flutter.
Yeah, we just filter out. But yeah, this is great. So this is great. But so what are we doing in 2 weeks with our design series, Sebastian?
Okay, no,
It's
I
a
don't
cold
remember.
question.
I think we're scheduled to talk about motion, but I was actually going to say we might postpone that because there are some designers on the material team that I would like to bring on, but I think some of them are busy because of the holidays. So if we can postpone that to the new year, that would be nice.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
sure. We can do the input and gestures one, or we can do the Figma lesson.
I am more than happy to do the Figma lesson.
Okay, so let's say probably learn to use Figma.
Sold.
Yeah. And I may have some designs that you could reuse, Ivan, for your book app.
Oh my god!
I mean, maybe we can do both things together. Like we can do the designs for the books app with Figma.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah. Oh, wow. This is so generous. I love it. Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
Uh,
Ivan is happy now.
Yeah.
no,
But I
oh
think,
my god, fuck me. This is so unexpected. Oh man, oh I love this. Oh my god. You see, that's why we can have nice things. Fuck that. We can have nice things.
Not always.
So not always, but yes. I love it. So wow.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris.
yeah,
And
of course.
see you in a couple of weeks.
Well, see
Sebastian,
Chris in a couple of weeks. Hopefully, see everyone
Yeah.
else on Sunday.
Yeah.
And maybe Chris is gonna be lurking in the chat on Wednesday next week.
Probably will. Like, I've been trying to make the Sunday ones, but it's like too early for me. So I'm
Yeah,
like,
I understand.
but I'm not an early riser, so.
But there's the VODs, so there's that.
Yeah.
Cool. It's time to go have dinner for us. So
All right. Well, take care.
goodbye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.